Well, greetings and salutations, and welcome once again to the Newsman Weekly Podcast. Many thanks to local country singer Luke Watson for supplying this show's current anthem, Smoke and Drink. And given the guys I work with here today, I think those are appropriate words. Welcome, everybody, to episode number 10 of the world's top-rated podcast. Okay, well, not number one in the world yet, but it is certainly the top-ranked podcast being produced at IdeaWorks here today.
Wow.
Well, unless somebody comes in later, and then they could take that. So many thanks to the thousands of you who have downloaded our little audio tomfoolery since we started 2.5 months ago. It is greatly appreciated.
Can't believe we're at episode 10.
Episode 10. We have a special...
What a milestone.
A milestone. We have reached double digits in production, and that, quite frankly, is mind-blowing. We do have a special show for you again today. Mansfield Safety Service Director Keith Porch will join us in a few minutes. The former Mansfield Police Chief retired from the department in late February of this year and then returned the very next day as Mayor Jody Perry's Safety Service Director. Traditionally in Mansfield, the Safety Service Director has been responsible for managing police and fire. Jody's added a few more jobs for Porch to manage, including permitting and development, city building maintenance, and the Mansfield-Lom Regional Airport. We're going to talk to Keith about all of that and more in just a few minutes during a two-part interview. You're going to hear the first part of that interview today and the second part next Tuesday, and that's all coming up. But right now, I am joined by Zac Hiser, the executive producer of the Newsman Weekly Podcast. Good morning, Zac.
Good morning, Carl.
And we're also joined by Knox Page's reporter Grant Ritchey, whose video skills continue to amaze and yet baffle me. Richie, did we ever post a video last week's show? Or
no, we had.
Do we have to find you yet another title?
Maybe like the water boy or intern, if you want to put me as an intern for this podcast.
If you're gonna wear a cowboy shirt in here, you're gonna be the H2O boy if you keep this up.
Yeah, we had some technical difficulties, I guess I would say, but yeah, it's not gonna happen again. So
yeah, technical difficulties as he clutches and rubs his cowboy's plastic helmet in his hands. All right, that's enough of that. Let's talk about the weekend. I spent Friday night and into Saturday morning covering the first week of the 2024 Ohio high school football season. I covered the Lexington and Ontario game for Richland Source, a game the Warriors won 31-14.
Warriors are looking pretty good this year.
Right, they're undefeated. Copeland Field at NIST Stadium had a packed house. It was a close game until Ontario broke it open in the fourth quarter. Quite the exciting atmosphere. Nothing beats Friday night lights in the state of Ohio. I got done editing pictures and writing my story around 2 a.m., collapsed into bed. I spent the rest of the weekend recovering, quite frankly. I covered my first high school football game 45 years ago, and my ability to bounce back quickly just ain't what it used to be.
It really takes a lot out of you, huh?
You know what? By the time, when the game's over, everybody gets to go home, and they get to go out to eat.
Yeah, you got to work.
I got home about 10:30. Kissed my wife goodnight. She went to bed, and I worked until 2 a.m.
It's a lot of steps you take on those sidelines. I've covered high school football before. I get it.
And you're in shape. I mean, imagine this little stout Winnie the Pooh body moving up and down the field all night, then get home. I hope you have the chance, everybody, to check out all of our Ohio high school football coverage in Richland Source, Ashland Source, and Knox Pages this weekend. We had a team of reporters and photographers at football fields all around north central Ohio. But enough about me. What about you, Zac? What did you do this weekend?
Oh, man, I can't be a rock and roll reporter every weekend like the previous weekend when I covered Mansfield Music Fest. So I just did stuff around the house. We're working on some trim.
Yeah.
Just worked in the yard a little bit. It was a boring weekend.
You're become quite the domesticated guy, from mosh pits to
I'm well-rounded.
Well-rounded mosh pits to rail painting.
There we go.
Leaf raking.
Yep.
Yard mowing.
Yep.
And childcare.
Exactly.
What an exciting life.
What an exciting life.
All right, Richie, now what madness did you engage in this weekend down in Knox County? I'm certain it was probably illegal, but feel free to share.
Well, Friday night I was at the Centerburg football game against Utica, and that was fun covering that.
Who won that game?
Centerburg.
Centerburg. All right.
Yeah, I think it was 21-6.
Yeah, Centerburg's coming up to play Ontario this week.
They are
undefeated.
So make sure you cover that so we can put that on next pages too.
Yeah. Okay.
Then last night I watched Jaws for the first time.
What?
Yeah.
What? No, you don't mean like the original 1976 Jaws.
Yes.
What'd you think? Does it hold up?
I think it does. It was the fact that movie is rated PG. I thought that was like so insane because there's a lot of like blood and it's pretty scary too. And
did you get scared by the shark?
I got scared of the part where that scientist goes in to check the boat that's in the middle of the night, and then they're going to see if they can find the shark. And the guy's searching it, and he sees a piece of a tooth, a great white tooth. And then this dead body, like this head just like pops out. And I actually did get jump scared by that.
Jump scared by a movie that was made 30 years before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty well, maybe not 30 years. It was a great movie. I remember when it came out, we stood in line to buy tickets in the afternoons. We only had one movie theater in Cambridge, but you had to go line up in the afternoon to buy tickets so you could come back later that night to see it. It was a great movie.
1975.
Yes, I couldn't remember whether 75, 70. I knew I wasn't driving yet because my mother had to take me and my friends to go see it. So.
You were like 11?
No, 75, I would have been 14.
Okay.
Yep. I still probably didn't get as scared as Richie did last night watching it on his television.
Right.
All right, let's talk quickly about what's happening in local news, and then we'll get to Keith Porch. Hey, guys, Mansfield is open for the cannabis business. City Council voted last week to allow up to 3 recreational cannabis dispensaries in the city, providing they're licensed by the state of Ohio and meet current business zoning requirements already established by the city. Local lawmakers also repealed a 6-year-old ban on medical cannabis dispensaries, so it shouldn't be that long before we have dual-use dispensaries in the city selling cannabis. The City Planning Commission is scheduled to meet Tuesday, and they're still discussing potential changes in zoning for local cannabis stores that would be specific to their use. But those cannabis-specific zoning ordinances likely won't be introduced to City Council and voted on before the first such dispensaries are approved for the city, and I can't wait till I can stop typing and saying the words cannabis and dispensaries.
The saga continues. We're making progress.
Well, we'll be when you look at the licensed places dispensaries are allowed. There's a big gap in the middle of north central Ohio where there aren't any.
Mm-hmm.
So when they are actually opened and doing business in Mansfield, I suspect 1, 2, or 3 of them will all be very busy.
So, real quick, are any cannabis shop owners or any investors are there any plans to like hit the ground running, or that going to?
There are businesses who have applied, but when I checked the Ohio Cannabis website last night, I still did not see where any licenses have been approved.
Okay.
They've talked about in terms of locations. I think there's discussions about the old hardware store on Lexington Avenue across from the shopping plaza
Kroger?
there, across the street. I've heard talk about somewhere around Hanley Road, the intersection of near the intersection of 13 and 71.
Makes sense.
Obviously, that would be a place. And I've heard maybe even out on West 4th Street before you get into Ontario. There's some businesses out there, some space that becomes available. So,
what's your prediction by end of 2024?
I think by the end of 2024, we'll have at least one.
We'll have one.
I think we'll have one
application approved.
The state's moving pretty quick. And I don't know how quickly, but it seems like I'm seeing a whole bunch of them being licensed. And now that all you have to do is meet those requirements and current zoning ordinances in Mansfield, I'd be shocked if, we didn't have one by the end of the year and maybe more.
There's money to be made.
There is money to be made. Also last week, Richland County Commissioners approved seeking bids for a $4.2 million wastewater improvement plan in Bellville near the intersection of Ohio 97 and Interstate 71. Bids will be opened September 17th for the project designed by Richland Engineering. The whole thing is designed to aid increased economic development along the Ohio 97 corridor. The county will use American Rescue Plan Act funds to pay for it, and that means a contract for the work has got to be signed by the end of this year, and the project has to be completed by the end of 2026. Officials hope a substantial part of that work will be done in 2025. The wastewater project will stretch along Ohio 97 from east of Bellville-Johnsville Road to Hiser Road on the west, near the site of the planned $22 million YMCA of North Central Ohio Sports Complex.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Officials hope the new sports complex is open by the end of 2025. And I know when people think about exciting, thrilling stories to write, maybe a wastewater treatment or wastewater improvement isn't one of them. But, folks, there's a lot of stuff coming to the 97 corridor in Bellville.
There is. And, yeah, and it's with the ARPA money, too. People,
right.
That's a interest. I didn't know that it was being used to fund this project in its entirety.
Yeah, this thing is something they've been talking about for a couple, 3 years now. It had to be original design work and then a complete design, and now they're going out to bids, and it involves an awful lot of work, including a new above-ground lift station there at Hiser Road. Their current lift station is over by Bellville-Johnsville Road and 97, and it's underground, and it's in a floodplain, and it's problematic. So this is the kind of infrastructure improvement that I think you have to have if you're going to have kind of a full-scale economic development.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot more traffic on that exchange.
Yeah, they're going to have to do something with 97. You can't have that be a two-lane road, and I mean, there's already stuff there. And if you're ever down there, especially in the mornings or on weekend mornings even, that is a very, very busy stretch of road.
Maybe a roundabout.
Yeah, maybe a roundabout. Look at Richie jumping in with a little roundabout action. Yeah, okay.
Love a good roundabout.
Love a good roundabout there. All right, what else is going on? Did you know a total of 3,796 Richland County voters recently had their names purged from voting rolls, meaning they won't be able to participate in the upcoming presidential election?
That sounds harsh.
Well, it was part of a statewide effort in July by Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose to remove 154,995 inactive and out-of-state voters from the statewide voter registration database. Now, there's a couple reasons why someone who was once a registered voter might have been removed. If they filled out a change of address form with the U.S. Postal Service signaling they moved, or if they've not yet voted, or if they've not voted at their registered address in the past 4 years after being marked for removal by a county's voter registration system. The voter purge is part of Ohio's process of updating its voter rolls and getting rid of voters who've either moved out of state or died, LaRose said. I talked to Richland County Board of Elections Director Matt Fingeld. He said most of the registrations eliminated locally, quote, have been inactive for a long time. You need to visit the Richland County Board of Elections website to see if your registration is still active, or you can call the board at 419-774-5530. Hiser, I assume you're still an active register.
You know what? I was thinking, I moved in 2018 to a new address, and the last time I voted, well, maybe it did change, but I wondered if they were still using my old address. But if I voted this year, last year, recently under the old address, I should still be on there, right? It's only if you haven't voted and have changed addresses, you're going to be purged.
It's always, as soon as I saw that story, as soon as I wrote that story last week, the first thing I did was go check my registration just to make sure.
What's the website again?
Just go to Richland County Board of Elections website. And, Richie, they probably did similar things in Knox County, so I hope you've checked and made sure that you're still a legal voter.
Yeah, I did a story about it a while ago. It's not that many in Richland County but compared to Knox, but, yeah, some did get purged.
Yeah, and you yourself are still a legal voter?
I believe so. I should double check.
Yeah, I would, because you can't have you be ineligible to participate in our great democracy.
That's right.
All right, last thing we'll touch on today. A Mansfield man initially charged with using the internet to seek sex with an 8-year-old girl was indicted last week on 31 felony counts almost all of which are related to child pornography. Bryce Ritchey, age 28, was arraigned Friday at 1 p.m. on all of the felony charges that a Richland County grand jury handed down. He appeared before Magistrate Jill Cochran. Ritchey, who was arrested by Mansfield police on an importuning charge in the early morning hours of June 14th, remains in the Richland County Jail on a $500,000 bond. He also has no access to any electronic devices or the internet, and is not allowed to have contact with any females outside of his immediate family and jail staff. They've got a pre-trial scheduled this week, and the county's website says there's a jury trial scheduled September 5th, but I'd be shocked if we actually had a trial that was ready to go and start that soon. All right, that's enough for now. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Mansfield Safety Service Director Keith Porch. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Newsman Weekly podcast. We're joined now by Keith Porch, the Safety Service Director for the City of Mansfield. Good morning, Keith.
Good morning, Carl.
How are you this fine day?
Fantastic, and always a pleasure to see you.
Well, you're the first person that's ever said that, including my wife, so thank you very much. Well, let's start with some discussion on your background for those who may not know Keith Porch. You grew up in Mansfield, graduated from Mansfield Senior High. I think you told me a while back that you always wanted to be a police officer. So where did that desire come from as a kid?
As far back as I can remember, I've always wanted to be a police officer. There was 2 Mansfield officers that lived on my street growing up. So seeing that presence of that cruiser pull in, I assumed they were coming home for lunch, and obviously growing up with their children and being around them, I mean, it started for a very early age for me. My father worked for the city of Mansfield for 33 years at the wastewater plant, so I always was out and would visit with him and to be around the city crews, and I really from the very beginning learned my work ethic from him. He was my biggest hero, and then number 2 was the Mansfield Police Department. So throughout my childhood, it never wavered. I've always wanted to be a Mansfield police officer, and even in high school, I remember students or my peers would make fun of me of that fact and call me Popo and 5-0 and
just walking down the hallway.
Yes, yeah. Yes. So even before getting out of high school, I've heard that chant, and that was again a passion. And for me, I've always said it, that was like winning the lottery for me when I began my first law enforcement career with the Richland County Sheriff's Office.
Now, you told me this story once, and I'm hoping that you'll be willing to tell it again, because I think it's funny. It's one of the funnier stories I've ever heard. You said your dad did work for the city in the wastewater treatment plant, and you told me a story once about you and your brother.
Yes.
Your first experience as a law enforcement officer at a young age, when you really weren't a law enforcement officer, but decided to engage with the radio and actually do some law enforcement. Tell that story.
Yeah, my brother and I, we used to have a scanner at the house, so we would learn the codes, the police codes, and the jargon back and forth on the radio. And so, we knew when officers were talking with dispatchers and the codes and what it meant. So one particular day, we visited my father out for lunch, and there was a row of 4 or 5 city trucks. That was the yellow trucks, and they had the yellow caution bar on top of these trucks. So, and I don't know what my dad was doing at that particular time, because we were outside, and
you were what, like 10 or 11 or something like that?
I probably 9 or 10. And we just that look I had with me and my brother, we locked eyes when we seen the trucks with the light bars, and it was like, well, let's play cops. And we knew that without even having to say it. So he jumped in one truck, I jumped in the other, and of course I seen the radios in there, and we were flipping on the light switches to have the caution bars activate. And so then for some dumb reason we decided to pick up the radios trucks, and we started talking back and forth with the radio designators that the police department use.
Mm-hmm.
And we're probably doing this for about 5 minutes, and then a dispatcher comes on that radio and says, what 300 units on this channel, meaning what police department vehicles on this channel. And we locked eyes and our face turned red. And at that particular time, we thought they had the technology. They could zone in on where this transmission was coming, and they were going to race out there and get us. So we jumped from those trucks, and we told our dad, we're out of here. We're good seeing you. And he was like, why are you guys leaving so soon? And we ran home. So it was probably not a smart thing to do, Carl, but looking back, it was funny.
Now, when did you tell him what really happened that day?
That took a couple years.
Yeah.
So, there was no doubt thinking about that now that had we been caught, and, obviously I don't think the city administration or his supervisors would appreciated his sons being in the trucks playing around. But
yeah, I know when I started at Ohio University as a freshman in 1979, before I left, my mother handed me a legal pad. And she goes, here, I need you to write down the top 10 things that you did wrong that you didn't want me to know about, because I need to know about them now.
yeah.
And I handed her the legal pad back and said, Mom, I was an angel. Just don't worry about nothing, and headed down to Athens. But now, you mentioned this earlier. You graduated from high school. I think you were too young to join the Mansfield Police Department. So you joined the Richland County Sheriff's Office in 1994 as a deputy for then the sheriff was Jim Steerhoff. How did you make that happen, and what was that experience like for you?
So, yes, so to be a state law enforcement officer, essentially a trooper, or to work for a municipality, you had to be 21 years of age. Now, my first step, I went down to apply to be a cadet dispatcher with the State Patrol. They accepted those applicants at 18. Because of the large interest of individuals at my time was trying to get into the state organization, they didn't have any openings. So, I was working at the Richland County Dog Warden's office at that time as a deputy warden. So I did intern with them when I was my senior year in high school. The dog warden, John Fisher, at the time, when I graduated, hired me as a full-time deputy dog warden. It was once I got turned down from the state, I then was talking with Warden Fisher, and he was like, hey, I know the sheriff, Steerhoff, because the sheriff had just taken office, I think, within maybe a year or two at that time. And he's like, maybe he could put you on as a special deputy. And a special deputy is essentially an auxiliary officer that's a volunteer. You do not get paid for those services.
Oh, kind of like being a reporter.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you're familiar. So when I went through the academy, you had to be sponsored. You just couldn't sign up at one of the local colleges to enter the police academy. A law enforcement agency had to sponsor you. So I met with the sheriff, and he said, absolutely, I'll sponsor you. I then began the academy 3 months after I graduated high school. While in the academy, continued to work for the dog warden's office. Once I graduated the academy and became a commissioned officer, I was working double shifts. So I'd work my shift at the dog warden's office and then go work night shift at the sheriff's office, doing full-time work with a deputy. I would ride with them and essentially perform the functions that they would and really learn the job. And I did that for probably 6 months, where I was probably killing myself doing double shifts, and developed great relationships with the employees and the deputies at the sheriff's office. I was always told at a young age you really had to know somebody at the sheriff's office to be able to get in there, and I knew nobody. And it was I probably chalk that up to my hard work of trying to prove myself to the crews on those shifts, and I mean ultimately that led to the sheriff recognizing that, and had interview with him and his command staff. And to be honest, Carl, I fully expected the sheriff to turn me down because of my age. Now, he did ask me, he's like, I got a spot. How about I put you in the jail and have you work in the jail for about a year? And I remember telling Sheriff Steerhoff that I think I'd better serve you on the road, which at the time,
that's pretty bold.
At the time, he chuckled and laughed, and he says, because really, it's the normal path is normally deputies would work within corrections before transitioning to the road, and he after that chuckle, he laughed and said, look, if you progress and pass to the rest of the test, you'll be my next road deputy. Now, as an 18-year-old, I can tell you, Carl, that I was, it was the most exciting day of my life, and one that I'll take to my grave. And just to think about that now, transition that of my life to where, luckily, I became chief of police with Mansfield, and my duties involve hiring officers. And when I was doing interviews of candidates, applicants, and some folks within 22, 24 years of age, and I can see the maturity level, and I would this guy or this person is just not going to work well for our agency. And going back in time to think the chance, the risks that Sheriff Steerhoff took on me to hand any 18-year-old a badge and a gun, and to tell that person, now go do a good job and represent me well, and the risk he took. I still think about that to this day, and obviously will be forever grateful for the opportunity that he gave me. So he was one of my greatest bosses I ever worked for, and I just can't think highly enough of him.
Yeah, I've met a lot of sheriffs around Ohio over the years, and I think Jim Steerhoff is right up there at the top in terms of professional law enforcement guys that I met and worked with. But do you recall any particular cases or calls that you responded to when you were 18, 19, and you're thinking to yourself, I'm dealing now with older people who might be in a, whether they're intoxicated or they're in a fight, they're older people, and here comes this kid showing up in his cruiser to try to smooth things over. Any particular calls stick out in your mind?
Well, Carl, I do remember, because at the time when I was a deputy, when I first started, I was about 145 pounds. So, of course, my age, it appeared to me that I was challenged a lot more than the more senior deputies, the older deputies. It was for the longest time. To your point, folks did like to say things because it looked like there was a 12-year-old knocking at their door. I remember my first night. I was riding with Deputy Tim Shook, and we were just left the sheriff's office. The patrol office used to be downtown where the county jail was, and we had just come out of roll call, and we were heading out east. We were assigned to Madison Township that night, and as we came to the by the underpass, the tones went out on the radio. Now, that meant zero to me at that time, but I could see by his look on his face and his response was that it was something serious. So it ended up being an armed robbery in progress at the Speedway gas station out on Spring Mill in Little Kentucky. So he looks at me and tells me to hold on, and those lights and sirens came on, and we raced there. And matter of fact, it was Sergeant Chris Nicewander was the first officer to arrive at that scene. We were the second, and I seen the sergeant leading him out, this guy by the neck of his coat, handcuffed, and my eyes were as big as the moon, and I thought, this is the greatest job on earth, and I would do it for 20 cents an hour. And and he, he went in, and it was an actual armed robbery. He went in and was able to get the guy to drop the gun and surrender himself. And I thought, at that time, what courage that took to confront that. And just as we were rolling into that call, so it sold me for life.
Yeah, I actually saw Chris Nicewander Saturday at the Phoenix, and I told him I was going to be interviewing you today, and I said, hey, give me like 3 or 4 really bad things I can mention to Porch about his early start in the sheriff's office, and he shook his head and said, nah, he's too good of people. We're not going to do that. So, all right, fast forward to 1999. You made the move across the street to the city building as a Mansfield police officer. Tell us about your early days as a patrol officer and maybe some lessons you learned early about working with the public.
So, when I left the sheriff's office, I didn't leave because I hated working there. It was a matter of, Mansfield officers were making a little more than deputy sheriffs at the time. And I, without a doubt, know that that decision I made did not please the sheriff at the time, but he understood it. But after almost a little over 5 years, I made the jump to Mansfield Police. That was the opportunity, and now it wasn't, because when you switch to another agency, you start at ground zero again. Your seniority, your vacation, everything, just the clock restarts. And then you have to go back through another training program, a field training program, which I wasn't excited about. I've been through that at the sheriff's office, and although, different agencies, different policies. So, I truly walked into the agency with an open mind to be taught and trained as a Mansfield officer. So, but once I got through that, it was, I remember, because at the sheriff's office, I had enough time where I could go to different shifts. So that was one of my concerns of going to Mansfield. But the recruiters and the officers I knew on Mansfield said, you only have to do maybe a little over a year on afternoon, and then you can go to night shift, which is where I always wanted to be.
That's where all the fun is, right?
Yeah, yes. So, and afternoons is at Mansfield Police is an extremely busy shift. But 8 years later, I still found myself on afternoons, and it was at the time I'm sure I complained about it, but it was the experience of a lifetime. Mansfield today is not what Mansfield was when I started. When I was on afternoon shift as a brand new police officer, we were running 100+ calls a night, and that was just for that shift. It was call after call, and that's also we have taken a step back, and I know we have talked about this with personnel. We used to have 12 patrol officers on that shift working with 3 sergeants and a lieutenant. So there was a lot of things we could do proactively and not to be reactive. It's sometimes on all hands days, we didn't have the vehicles for officers to go. Some officers would have to take vacation or their own time off because nobody could get on the radio to talk. We had that many people. But the transitioning from the sheriff's office over to municipal police work within Mansfield are night and day difference. But what I did learn at the sheriff's office is my backup. If something went wrong or if I needed help, it was 15, 20, 25 minutes away. We covered almost 600 square miles. And when I was at the sheriff's office, there was 6 to 7 deputies per shift. Now that was a lot at the time, but again, the deputies were broken up into segments of county, and if something went wrong, we were depending on local law enforcement or your fellow deputy to respond. So this is where I learned key was how to be able to engage, to speak with people, and give people their time to try to diffuse situations. If I'm a Mansfield officer, if something goes wrong, all I got to do is key the mic in those days, and I would have 5 officers at the scene right away. And I pride of me be able to learn from the sheriff's office and that environment that you need to take time to build relationships, to talk with people, to diffuse those things. And that definitely, I believe, helped me transition when I became an officer with Mansfield Police.
I think, was it 25 years with the MPD?
Yes.
I think you had just about every job possible. I think you made sergeant in 2009, lieutenant in 2013, jumped all the way to assistant chief
Yes.
in 2014, and then chief in 2019 to replace Ken Kuntz. As you look back with all the different jobs you had, various roles in the department, what was your favorite job? And is there a job that as you look back, you say, I don't think I'd want to do that one again?
My favorite job, and I know I've said this at promotional ceremonies, the best job in the police department is the rank of sergeant, your field supervisor. So that person, I was a field training officer, so as an officer, I took that role very serious to train new officers, and really enjoyed that. But that transitioned into a field supervisor, a sergeant, and you still are there to mentor, train new officers, to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And no officer intentionally goes out to make a mistake. They're humans, they're going to make mistakes, and that's where that sergeant rank is there to mentor, to train, to make sure policies and procedures are done correctly, and that everybody goes home safe. I really enjoyed being a sergeant on the police department, and will always say that was the best job. Now, the least favorite job, I loved all my positions. It truly was different opportunities in my career. The least favorite challenging position was the assistant chief's role. I knew the expectations from the chief going into that spot, and I always viewed that role as I would give the chief my 2 cents. And at the end of the day, obviously the weight of that decision falls on the chief, and he can pick to take that 2 cents or go down a different road. And then there's been times where the chief didn't take my suggestions and decided to go a different route. And those are times where, I just truly tried to view myself as an advisor to the chief, and to make sure he had the best information possible to make a decision. But that was truly stepping into that administrative role, and that, as you know, Carl, that I was probably hit at 18 different directions, and it's multitasking to the very definition, and it definitely took a year and a half before I felt comfortable in that position. Now, if you remember, when Chief Kuntz and then eventually myself became the assistant chief, we had a lot of senior staff leave at that time, which has never happened in the history of the Mansfield Police. So there was probably people put into positions that quite weren't ready. And what I mean by that is through training, through experience, and I was one of those. I will fully admit that at the time, I was 39 years old, one of the youngest assistant chiefs in the history of that police department, and I felt that I don't want, maybe rob is a strong word. I wanted more time in my position of because I was currently at the Metric Enforcement Unit. I was the lieutenant there, the commander. I wanted maybe a little more experience. Now, absolutely, I could have said no, and I'll stay where I'm at, but those type of opportunities are far in between, and you really have to jump on those if when they pop up. And but it was a great experience too. You know, the chief allowed me to do many things that assistant chiefs shouldn't be doing. So I was able to learn the chief's role in the administrative functions of the budget, which is, my sole purpose was to make him look good, to make sure he was prepared, and hopefully, I did that.
So you become chief in 2019. Let's talk about a couple of kind of big events that hit you pretty quickly. 2020. We get COVID, we get the death or the homicide of George Floyd up in Minneapolis. We get a lot of racial and civil unrest around the country. There came a big day when there was going to be a big protest rally in Central Park. You've been the chief less than a year. You got to be thinking, did I really ask for all of this?
Yeah.
And talk about how you handled that time in the city of Mansfield.
You know, that was a challenging time for me. You know, there was a lot of things that, as you said, hit all at once. The George Floyd situation did not, and of course, as you know, it went across the country, and and a lot of protests were popping up, and the last thing I want is any type of civil unrest within the city of Mansfield. You know, we were getting a lot of reports of businesses were going to be damaged, riots, and of course through social media outlets. But you have to vet those, but you have to take any of those concerns seriously. And at the end of the day, there was a time where we knew that there was going to be some protests in the downtown area, and I wanted to remove because law enforcement was the source of the conflict, of the civil unrest. So I wanted to remove the visual of that from the downtown, which I did not want a strong police presence or with uniforms. Now, clearly, I still had officers in the area in undercover capacities to make sure there was no law violations. I tried to make it very clear we would not tolerate violations of law and any type of violent behavior. And we had the drone unit at the time, so we had the drone up monitoring the crowd from a far distance away. And I wasn't going to nickel and dime folks with violations of vehicles or minor issues. So I wanted them to have their moment to be able to protest the issues they felt strongly about. Now, we did have a tense moment at one particular time where crowds circled officers as we tried to block traffic, not to get into the crowds of folks. And thankfully, they were able to, cooler heads prevailed, and they were able to disperse. And so very tense moments for me. So it was, thinking back on it, I'm just glad we did not have one arrest, we did not have any violence that day. So
it was interesting. I happened to cover the rally that day for Richland Source, and I remember standing in Central Park looking around and thinking, this is remarkable. I don't see a single uniformed police officer within my view, but I said to myself, I know they're there. They're probably just outside. And I thought, it was a great rally. Everyone got along. I think there was a lot of good things got said that day. The only people I saw that I questioned is when I was walking back to Richland Source that day to get my car, because I parked down here. Excuse me. And there were, I think, 3 idiots dressed in camo in the parking lot across the street carrying their assault rifles.
yes,
And I remember looking at them saying, what kind of jerks are you people? You
Yeah.
know? Probably none of you could pass a ASVAB test and actually get in the military, and you're out here wearing camo and carrying your assault rifles and acting like you're actually doing something. And I'm just glad they stayed down there and didn't try to come uptown that day.
Absolutely. So, and that was another thing that was hot and heavy, that, the open carry situation. So we had requests of, folks wanting, and these are, what amazes me is these are folks that do not live in Richland County, do not live in Mansfield. The amount of people that want to come from out of this area, out of state, to interject themselves into our issues, or which I just always have found it astounding. And you just have to turn those folks away, and because anytime you interject firearms into a scenario, Carl, it's just the potential there is just a really bad day.
All right, now let's fast forward a couple of years. I can't imagine, though, even though 2020 was kind of a trial by fire, I can't imagine a tougher year to be the Mansfield police chief than in 2023. You had a record 12 homicides that year, all of them by gunfire. From a professional and personal standpoint, how difficult was 2023 to be the police chief in Mansfield?
Well, let me back up prior to that, Carl. Before that, I had 3 officer-involved shootings in a matter of 6 weeks, which has never happened in the history of Mansfield. And those are extremely stressful events, very time-consuming. The public demands answers, and they want those answers within an hour after a shooting or the next day, which there's nobody in the world that wants to be able to provide that more than me or a police chief. And but those are processes and investigations that have to take place before you can finally tell the public the full scope of A to Z on those investigations.
And while all those investigations are going on, those officers are not working.
Correct.
And you take a shorthanded department, and now you've got X amount of officers sitting at home or not patrolling because they're on administrative leave.
Yes. So that was before I guess we jumped to the homicide side. That to me was very stressful. So there's certain procedures that have to be followed. You want to bring in the outside investigators of BCI because you want an independent evaluation of that. Now, I have always believed that our detective section is fully capable of investigating those incidents, but I also understand the public's view of removing our investigators from those type of incidents and having an independent evaluation and investigation done. So, yeah, but obviously all 3 of those were, 2 occurred in the city and 1 was out in Richland County as part of a SWAT operation. And, those are, because at the end of the day, whether, when you take those actions and somebody loses their life, whether if it's 1,000% correct as far as legally, justifiably, that's still a day where somebody lost their life. And, those are the things that you never want to do, and you hope in a career that you never have to do. And those, I lost many hours of sleep at night on those things, and yes, but finally jumping to the homicide, I truly believe that a police chief is, probably when homicides are happening, that's, and how those things are conducted, that's from the public, they view that as the police chief, that's priority 1 of, what are we doing with these type of investigations. And we lost 12 individuals that year, which, that is something I have always taken very seriously, as that was the priority I had was gun violence, but it seemed that what I didn't have is personnel to make sure we could jump on those right away. I think I'm the first police chief to ever call Richland County agencies and other detectives to help our detective squad. I wanted to make sure not just one homicide was being concentrated on and kind of like daisy chain. I want to make sure that they were following up on tips at on all of them and wherever they went. So they worked very hard on those investigations, and I mean, obviously, very we had a lot of tension within Mansfield with the rise of that violence, and ultimately it was the highest homicide rate we've ever had within the city of Mansfield. We beat that by one. So,
but you made some changes in the department to kind of help address that. I think the whole creation of your CAT team, I think, that you brought about. Homicide rate has gone down dramatically, knocking on wood, as I say it, in 2024. Kind of talk about those changes that you make, and how would you characterize the effectiveness of that change?
So it was my intent to always start a community action team, and we call it a CAT team for short. I wanted a team of officers within the community policing section to whatever the issue may be. Now, of course, that issue at that time was we were dealing with shootings and violence and homicide, violent crime, and I wanted that team to immediately stay on that and to address it. As a patrol officer, you're going call to call, and once you finish the call, you're going to the next. I wanted that team to stay on that call or that issue, that problem, until it was solved, in conjunction with working with our major crimes detectives and our drug detectives. So, I was trying to wait until personnel levels improved. Clearly, that didn't happen, and then I immediately activated that team as a part-time squad and duties. So these officers were still working their patrol shifts, but then they'd be called in to work the whatever issues may be popping up at that time to deal with it. We sent supervision of that team to Chicago for gang-related schools and violence, and so it slowly but surely began paying dividends. Now it's of course I would and I know talking with the new chief that it says his intent to improve upon that team. I believe we've had profound impacts when we're paying attention to the individuals that we know are committing violence in our community, and so when we're able to prepare those cases and ultimately present those either to the Richland County prosecutor or federal attorneys, then the gang specs land on there, because there's certain criteria that has to be met for that, and they have had fabulous results with that.
All right. Mansfield residents elected a new mayor November of last year. Jody Perry took office in January in a city that had not had, believe it or not, a full-time safety service director for almost 3 years. I think Dave Ramey was filling both for at least the good part of Mayor Thager's last term in office. When did the mayor-elect talk to you about the job, and how tough a decision was it to leave the MPD and move up to the 9th floor and begin the transition into civilian life?
Mm-hmm. So it was, shortly after Mayor Perry was elected, it was around, I believe, November, December. Please forgive me on the time frame, where the mayor reached out and she wanted to have a conversation. I met with the mayor. We had a good talk for about a half an hour, at which time she looked at me and she says, "I would love to offer you the position of safety service director," which I was obviously completely floored, shocked, honored that she would consider me for that role. But then beyond that initial shock, was a decision I had to make, which she informed me, "Hey, take 2 weeks to really talk with your family and ultimately decide if that's what you want to do, and then we would reconvene and speak." Of course, I talked with my wife, and because Carl, I did obviously I sit here as the safety director now, but I didn't leave the police department because I hated it, or I loved being a Mansfield police officer. Take chief out of that role. I loved really working and being an officer for Mansfield, and it was one of the toughest decisions that I've had to make in my life. It was. And it really drove home for me when my wife says, isn't 30 years enough? Don't you want to go and be challenged to do something else? And this is a great opportunity. And of course, family is always number one. And after having that discussion, and with my wife, and she was correct. It was time to turn the reins over to somebody else of the police department, and me to step into new challenges. And ultimately, I accepted the position. Now, at the time when the mayor had offered the position, I wasn't at my 25-year mark with the city of Mansfield. February 26th, 27th was my 25th year, and I told the mayor if it was her intent to have a safety director start on January 2nd, I could not be that person. And to her credit, and which she says, I'll wait until you can retire, and then you can start essentially the next day, almost, which was February 28th. So so here we are, almost 6 months later.
Yeah. All right, Keith, we'll end part one of our two-part conversation there. Thanks for being here. We'll have part two of this chat next week on the Newsman Weekly podcast. And folks, we'll have to leave it at that there for today. I'll be back in a second to put a bow on this week's podcast. And until then, please remember what Mark Twain said. If you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.